Hi guys, so something came up in a recent video I put online was the question of long swords or bastard swords or hand and a half swords, whatever you want to call them, being used in one hand. So what we established in that video was that there are lots of examples in historical artwork from the medieval and Renaissance periods through the 14th through to 16th centuries of these being used in one hand. There are examples of them being used with bucklers and with shields, or just on horseback in one hand or on foot in one hand, and yet clearly having the long grip of a hand and a half sword, of a long sword. Equally they're described in texts being used in one hand, including in the fencing manuals of the period, in the fencing treatises of the period. And there are various reasons why you might want to use it in one hand, as we mentioned. Perhaps because you're riding a horse, or so you can use something else in your other hand, or so that you can grapple someone with your left hand, and so on and so forth. But a question that often comes up is how well do longswords handle in one hand? But the simple answer is it depends very much on the longsword in question. Okay, so in talking on the comments of that last video with Lindy Beige or Lloyd, my basic response was that, you know, it depends on the longsword. Some longswords are clearly much more designed to be used as two-handed swords in two hands, and although you can use them in one hand, they might be quite inconvenient. And whereas others really are essentially a one-handed sword, the same as a one-handed sword, but with a longer grip. So to answer the question, how well does a longsword function in one hand, you can't really answer that question as a general rule without referring to the specific sword in question, because clearly you could just take a one-handed sword, give it a slightly longer grip, and it will still handle very much the same, but you will have a two-handed grip, so you could use it as a two-handed sword if you wanted to. However, I would add to that generally speaking, a sword that's been designed to be used probably most of the time as a two-handed sword, which is generally speaking, when we're talking about a long sword, they generally are a bit heavier and have a bit of a longer blade. So whereas a medieval one-handed sword might have, if we talk about averages, even though there's a wide range of stats in originals, you could say maybe a one-handed medieval sword on average has about a 33-inch blade, something like that. A medieval longsword maybe has on average about a 37-inch blade, so it's a bit longer, and therefore it's a little bit heavier. You're maybe looking at 3.5 pounds as opposed to, or maybe 3 to 3.5 pounds as opposed to sort of 2.5 pounds for a one-handed sword. So they're a bit longer, a bit heavier. So very clearly in these situations, if it's a long sword that's really optimised for using in two hands, but can be used in one hand, it's never going to handle quite as well as a one-handed sword would do if you're using it one-handed. So if you want to fight most of the time on horseback, or you want to fight most of the time with a shield, for examples, and there are other examples, then you may well be better off picking a one-handed sword rather than a long sword as such. So there we go, that's all I want to say really in this video, that generally speaking a one-handed sword does a better job at being a one-handed sword than a long sword does. What the long sword really brings is versatility. So a bit extra reach, longer blade, a little bit more weight, and of course a longer hilt, so you can use it two-handed. So there you go, the longsword really, what you're gaining is versatility, and what you're losing, because usually with weapons where you gain one thing you lose something else, what you're losing is that it's not really quite as good as a one-handed sword if you're using it one-handed. Okay, thank you.